Welcome to Chess on the Brain. Okay, so I'm going to continue the series of analyzing viewer submitted games with Matt Fletcher's game from Twitter. So we have Matt, it's Fletch MK64. All right, so right here, he was playing black. And this was an interesting game because it's one of those examples where you have this symmetry, which I would like to avoid in the first place, but you end up with this kind of symmetry in the pawn structure, and how do you get something out of it? Unless you just want to play for a draw, but that's not ideal. If you want to play for a draw, play for a win, as they say, right? So after knight f3, knight f6, he's playing as black against not c4, so we have an English opening. Of course, it can transpose into something else, but we're beginning with an English, and he goes for g6. So inviting all sorts of transpositions into a King's Indian or a Grunfeld. Knight goes to c3, d5. Okay, so it's kind of a, I think they consider this like a neo-Grunfeld. So it's like Bobby Fischer played a lot, the Grunfeld defense with d5, but generally that's with the pawn on d4 against the d4 opening rather than a c4 opening. But the idea is similar in a lot of ways. So we're gonna try and get the knight in the center, and sometimes take on c3. So white forces the issue with e4 right away. If I were playing with white here, I don't think I would have played e4. I like the g3 structures. I probably would have hung back a bit, played like g3, bishop g2, maybe waited a bit before expanding with e4 in the center. But this is probably the most pressing move. e4. Okay, so knight takes, d takes. Okay, well that's not pressing. So basically now white says, all right, I'm going to play a different kind of game. I'm inviting you to go into an end game. And sure, I lose my castling rights after this, but my king has a little pocket where he can hang out on c2. So knight goes to d7. This seems all normal. So, but let's break it down now. So we've kind of, we've immediately transitioned from an opening into like a late middle game, almost an end game. So white has a little more space in the center due to the pawn on e4. Of course, black can always contest that space with e5. Development is approximately equal. We both have a knight out. We both have one opening for each of our bishops. So it's not, yeah, there's no drastic differences in the position at this point. We both have, in terms of where our pawns are placed on the board, where the pawn islands are, they're in the same places. So again, if black plays e5 and c6, then we'll really have almost near symmetry other than g6. So I would try to imbalance it somehow if I were playing it as black here. But let's see how it goes. So bishop f4, provoking c6. I'm not sure what the rating of his opponent was. Maybe white is playing for a draw himself in this position, which is kind of annoying because sometimes you can be playing against a low-rated player and they say, hey, I want to get a draw against you, and they create this sort of symmetry. So again, like this is about how naturally goes to c2. Now we have f6. That was interesting. Well, I guess also potentially getting a pocket for the game. But I think it looks like he wants to play e5 here, and that was played next move. So f6 preparing e5. But again, that's dead symmetry. So almost dead symmetry. So how can we avoid it? Maybe bishop g7 right away. Interestingly, Stockfish likes f6 and e5 as the best moves. Let's just say we did bishop g7, for example. And bishop went to e2. I mean, theoretically, you can claim that white has created some weaknesses. I mean, you can attack the e-pawn. This square has become, again, theoretically weakened because of the fact that the pawn went to c3 and the pawn went to e4. So we can try and target that in the future. It's a theoretical thing, but maybe. It's going to be hard, though. But the key here is like whenever you have situations like that, as black, you can just take advantage of the fact that you haven't advanced as much in an endgame. In the middle game, that space is more relevant sometimes. But in an endgame, the space can turn against you if you can attack the pawn. So yeah, it looks like knight c5 here. And then maybe you could just try and play without playing e5 and see how things develop. So that may have been an alternative. After f6, bishop to e3, e5. Okay, so again, very, very much dead symmetry. knight d2, that seems reasonable. So now he can play f3, or if he really wants to break the symmetry, reminds me of a game I did recently where I did f4 to break that symmetry. Also, the knight can come, so now that we have the weakness on d6, you might see the knight come into c4 to aim it in that square combined with the rook on d1. So that may be white's idea in this position. I think white also wants to just expand somehow on the queen side. So bishop goes to c5, trading off theoretically the bad bishop. Since their central pawns are on dark squares now, it would seem to make sense to trade those. You know, I'm going to stop Stockfish because he keeps on making all these arrows and stuff. Let's just analyze the ideas. Forget about Stockfish. We don't need it right now. Okay, maybe in a super, super complex position, but here we're going to just try to look at the plans. So bishop c5, if he takes, knight takes, and the knight might go to e6 next. Are there any other moves? I'd be left with a theoretically good bishop against the bad one, but it's not that clear, you know, because the bishop's going to go to c4, and if you go to e6, he's going to trade you off anyway. And they may no, they didn't trade off light squared bishops. So okay, we can try and play with the better bishop, but it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to get anything out of this. So after knight d2, bishop c5. What else can we do? What about knight c5? That's kind of interesting. If we go knight c5 right away, I mean, bishop c4 is still coming, stopping bishop e6. The knight might end up on e6, hitting f4 potentially. And then you could do something modest like bishop d7, eventually castle queen side. You got to watch out for a7 though, something like that. That's another possibility that I would look at. After bishop c5, bishop takes, knight takes. Okay, so again, theoretically, we have some pressure here, and our bishop should be a little bit more active because of this central pawn. But it's not totally locked. It's like a semi-closed game. If we had another pawn on, say, d5, another white pawn on d5, then I would definitely be much happier with this bishop. Now it's like, okay, it's something we can still claim that we can work with. Now b4, that's a commitment. So again, the pushing of the pawns creates some weaknesses. It's gaining space, creating weaknesses, a double-edged sword of space. So again, there was a chance to create asymmetry, and yet Matt goes ahead and makes it symmetrical once again. So knight a4. The only other move I would look at would be knight e6. That seems like the natural move to make. I probably would have done knight e6 there. It seems more centralized. You know, it's more centralized. You're hitting this. If you can ever somehow weaken this structure, like if you could play a5 and takes, we can imagine some scenario where the pawn takes back, and then we gain access to d4, which I would love. That's what I want. f4 as well. But f4 might be more of a temporary post, whereas d4 could become more of a permanent support point, an advanced support point for the knight. So b4, knight a4. I think Stockfish liked this move. It's just, I'm not quite sure I understand it. I mean, you're looking at c3, but where's the coordination here? Well, you end up playing b5. So Matt goes ahead and plays b. That was later. That's on move 21. We're on move 13. So a little while later, b5 is played, holding the knight there, maybe coming back. But again, how can you claim to be any better than your opponent if you just do the exact same thing that white's doing? And white, to boot, has a little extra development. So, I like to play on, you know, uncompromising chess. Never go for symmetry. Never go for always trying to you know, create imbalances. That's kind of, you know, coming from Jeremy Silman, which I talk about a lot. So my inclination would be, how can I imbalance the structure as much as possible? And definitely the inclination is to play a5. So maybe that's an improvement if you're looking for, you know, to mix things up a little bit and to avoid this sort of drawish scenario, which will actually turn out to be a slight edge for white, interestingly enough. So it's instructive how white's able to get something out of it. So there's something to be learned from that too. But I think we create the grounds for that to happen based on the sort of lack of counterplay. So king e7, and again, another thing would be f5. But this pawn needs to be supported by this pawn. So Well, okay, maybe that's why you hit him with b5 and then try to get f5, so the knight has to leave that, it leaves the e5, putting pressure on e5. So he has to go somewhere more passive. But the thing is, the second you play b5, it's very important in terms of the pawn structure. I think I have down there that pawn is the soul of chess from Philidor. And the second you play b5, well, now he comes here and he hits a new weakness on c6. So he's either putting pressure on e5 or c6. You can't have it both ways. I mean, one way or the other, he's gonna put pressure on you. So I don't know. It's hard at this point to get something for black here. Let's see if anything opens up. Okay, now he plays knight a5 anyway. Well, given that he moved there, maybe I would just play f5. That seems uncompromising. Just play f5 and try to open the f file and stuff. But yeah, it is a bit hasty, perhaps, because now e5 becomes a weakness. The second, it's very delicate position. Every single pawn move could potentially weaken something. It does weaken something else. It's like a domino effect. So after knight a5, rook d8, bishop c4. Okay. Well, yeah, he gets, so it turns out that his bad bishop is not so bad after all in practice, because he gets outside the pawn on e4, or perhaps it becomes a pawn chain, and you get away from all that. I'd say it's approximately equal. It looks like it's about equal here, but this knight is a bit of a headache. I think this knight is more of a headache than this knight is for white, because what are you going to do about b7? Well, he does rook b8. Seems natural. Bishop goes to b3, knight goes to b6, rook hd1. So again, it's just, I don't see where this game is going to go. We're just trading down. Well, maybe it's the kind of thing where you think, all right, we're going to trade off, and you get your draw, and then you play for the win with white next game. The classical Karpov style, win with white, draw with black. Maybe if that's I'm not sure. Let me know if that was your intention or not, Matt, to play for a draw, or who this guy was, or if you think there was a way to favorably or potentially create some favorable imbalances for you. So bishop d7. We have to figure out how to handle this structure. So probably by guarding c6, we can move the knight somewhere and then kick the knight out. Well, then he's going to go back where he came from. And look at that, he's still looking in here. Well, we got the knight guarding it, but he'll still be trying to come into d6. Yeah, earlier I would have liked that to crack this. I want to get that a5 in, but now with that knight, controlling that territory, the dark squares, is not easy. Rook hd1, takes, bishop d7. Okay, now f3 is played, securing the center. Knight retreats to c8, well, reroutes, coming to d6. Well, if we can get this and then f5, now we're really putting pressure on e4. Just think of it like this. This is a useful mindset tool that I like to, sort of exercise I like to use. Okay, if you're at 2,700 playing against a 2,400, how would you outplay your opponent here? Because everyone can be outplayed, right? I'm always trying to outplay someone. I don't care who I'm playing, a 2,100 or a 2,800. I don't care. I'm going to try to outplay. Okay, maybe I'll take a draw against the 2,800, but I want to try to outplay them somehow. Because you just, that's the mindset you need to have, because anybody could be outplayed. You see it happen all the time. High-rated players losing to someone 500 points lower. I'm sure it's happened to everybody. So we can outplay him here I think by doing knight d6 and f5. Believe it, it can happen. And then we're really talking about that superiority of the bishop. So his bishop becomes more of a defender. And how do we turn this one into the attacker? Well, imagine we reroute our bishop via e8 somehow. Especially if things get traded, you can imagine the bishop going to g6, opening up that diagonal. I mean, just feeling the superiority of your bishop, the relative superiority over its counterpart on b3. There's something there, I think. Again, this is annoying, of course, but after b6, I don't see too much. Now we'll probably have knight d6, he's just going to try and trade it off and again just achieve equality for white. But hey, if it's white who moved first, who's playing for equality, it's probably not a terrible thing, as the second player there. So after b5, okay, but again, that's where there's just that dead symmetry. It stays there. I hate symmetry. There's my bias coming out. But b5, the knight comes back again. Well, look what's happened. So with b5, again, as I mentioned, we weakened c6, and this is permanently weakened. So you don't even have the option of booting him with b6 anymore. I don't like yeah, honestly, I don't think I like the look of b5. And look at that. Now we sort of have the bad bishop now. We're the ones whose bishop is more hampered by his own pawns than the bishop on b3. So these may seem like trivial points, but these can win and lose games sometimes. It's more about the mobility. It leads to increased mobility for this bishop, unless you want to trade it off, of course. But that still becomes a weakness on c6. Well, he's going to come back and say, hello, c6 pawn. Well, there you go. He's immediately hitting it, so you can't even do that if you wanted to. So it turns out, for the time being, that the superior bishop, the one who's won the minor piece battle, is white, as well as the knight. So at the moment, that's really what's at stake here, is the minor piece battle. White's minor pieces are better than black's, if that makes sense. And other than that, well, the rook isn't doing much. So you can just see the superiority of white's pieces at the moment over black's due to the pawn structure, due to these little things like this. It's interesting. I think it's really instructive position for that. So let's see, I think white ended up sort of squeezing something out of this due to those tiny advantages building up. That's sort of the essence of positional chess, is building up small advantages based on the differences between your position and your opponent's position, milking those advantages until it becomes decisive, until something explodes, or as Fisher says, tactics flow from a superior position. So I think we can argue that white is better. Let's see what Stockfish says. I think he'll say, sorry, I'm not going to give it I'm not going to treat it as a human, but we'll say what it thinks. Yeah, so it thinks that white is up approximately half a pawn, maybe a little less, but it does see some superiority now. Yeah, so after rook c8, well, if we can get c5 in, that's interesting. If you can make that happen, you're off the hook, but no, he doesn't let you. Of course, white is astute in this position, and he sees, hey, I see what my opponent is trying to do. He wants to break. Well, I'm going to prevent him from doing that by going here and holding that square tight. So it's very important. Sort of prophylaxis, preventive play, very annoying, restricting counterplay. Okay, it happened. So bishop e6, so he said, okay, fine. It turns out that your bishop was very good. I want to get rid of it, so we go bishop e6. Now the knight just comes into c5, huh? And he says, well, either I'm going to have a superior knight over your bishop. Like, for example, if you go here, probably he would just take it. And I feel like the knight is going to be more active than the bishop. Well, not to mention there's an immediate tactical refutation to that, because you've given up the d7 square by moving your bishop to c4. So tactics, again, tactics flow from a superior position. Case in point. I'm not trying to be harsh, Matt. I'm not trying to be harsh, but hopefully you get something out of this. I mean, he's a strong player. I think Mattson is somewhere in the 2000s. So he knows. I'm sure he knows all the stuff I'm talking about. But just couldn't hurt to have it reiterated. And for anyone else who maybe doesn't know as much about positional chess, couldn't hurt. So now this is interesting. This is a great example of the doubled pawns being incredibly useful. So for one thing, it covers c4 and a4, keeping the black knight out of those squares. Secondly, it opens up the a file for use of the white rook to attack the pawn, which has now become backward on a7. So with a takes b3, there's a myriad of advantages that suddenly white gains. And yeah, you got to say that white's just better here. So suddenly, let's do a quick analysis on Stockfish. It went from like plus 0.3 to plus 0.6 or 0.7, I'm sure. And once it does more analysis, so it's beginning to shift in white's favor here based on those slight advantages. Now, did we have to take on b3? I don't like it because I want to reserve that square. Maybe, what about, yeah, maybe been a bit hasty. How about bishop c4? Because the knight, for the time being, still covers this. So maybe you're playing more for a draw, but at this point, just say, hey, let's take the draw, move on, and next game play a little more imbalanced. And then we can try and trade off this. And I don't think there's any immediate refutation to like any of black's structure in terms of winning any of these weaknesses. You notice that the black king is farther away from these pawns. The white king is closer to his own weaknesses, especially c3, which is favorable for white there. So every little detail matters. If nothing else, chess will teach you to be like a detective and have incredible attention to detail, to be painstaking in your analysis. So bishop takes b3, a takes b3, rook c7. Okay, well yeah, now we're sort of stuck in this passivity. I guess you didn't want to trade rooks for some reason, like the knight coming in. Is that losing? If we allow the knight to go with a check, is it so bad? I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think it's. I may be missing something, but on the face, on his face, it doesn't look that bad. The knight's got to move. It's fine on c5. Again, that relative superiority, because he gets to sit on c5, you don't get to sit on c4 based on the b3 pawn. So its counterpart, superior to its counterpart. That's always something you want. So rook c. Now it looks like all black can hope for is just to create a sort of a fortress and hold on. But that's usually not a good defensive strategy, because you want to play active defense. Even if you have to sack a pawn, active defense is always best. So rook c7, you're sort of confined within, sort of stewing in your own juices, as we say. So bishop takes b3, a takes b3, rook c7. Yeah, I just feel like suddenly it's all white here, and now let's see, is it increasing? Now there you go. Now you have 0.7, 0.8, so it's just building and building over time. So 0.6, but it's getting up there. So once the knight's trade, interestingly, even though rook endgames are notoriously drawish, it turns out the rook endgame is winning for white, or incredibly advantageous for white. So you trade off the knights, but in order to do so, I think you end up letting the pawn on c5. Yeah, kind of make a deal with the devil there. King d6, knight a6, rook b7. So we're just shuffling around a bit. He checks, have to come back. Okay, that's a smart move, I think, because white's saying, all right, I have some advantages on the queen side. This has come up in a few videos where you say, all right, Capablanca style, let's play on both wings and increase our advantages over there as well, and try to see if we can, get something in addition to just this. The principle of two weaknesses or two strengths, especially if we can make this pawn invade deeper in the territory, that's just another thing that your opponent has to think about, like in an endgame. But okay, so you stop it, h5. Now he gets g4, and then later on he gets g5, which is nice, and that weakens e5. So we see this interdependence among the pawns, and you're trying to destroy that interdependence, destroy the harmony within their position. If that doesn't sound too violent for you, because I'm a peaceful guy, but yeah, chess is war. So war of the mind. After rook b6, knight c5. Knight takes c5, b takes c5. Okay, so now the space advantage, as I mentioned, sometimes space can come back to bite you in the endgame if the weak pawns that are pushing forward can be attacked. But in this case, it sort of has that squeezing factor, as well as fixing a weakness on c6, in addition to anchoring in the rook here when it can attack here, in addition to g5, which, let's say the pawn takes, you take, that unveils the g6 pawn. So suddenly everything is kind of working in white's favor, and it becomes decisive. So this pawn on c5 is kind of just like a winning asset. And again, let's just do a quick, just to give you an idea of the evaluation. Now we're at +1. So it basically thinks that white's up the equivalent of like a pawn now. And that's, well, it hasn't done a deep analysis. You'd have to like sit it down for maybe 10 minutes to get some kind of clarity in its evaluation. But I think we can see ourselves here without any computer thoughts. After rook b7, now the rook sinks in, penetration to the 6th rank. Well, that's usually where the knight wants to go, but the octopus on the 6th. But the rook on the 6th is very strong here. Rook on 6th or 7th or 8th. But we're attacking weaknesses, and as I said, g5 is going to be a killer move there. But first of all, you need to deal with this. So just a huge initiative here for white. Yeah, I just don't think there's a defense here. It's going to be tough because we're just sitting tight, passively stewing in our own juices, and our opponent's just going to keep on building and building and building. And you could win a lot of great games. I was thinking the other day that, it's fun to win a quick flash attack, win a quick game like that. But sometimes sort of Karpov style, just boa constrictor style, squeezing your opponent, torturing them, as it were, that can be sometimes a more gratifying win than just like, hey, let's just finish it real quick. Let's make it last a while, make that squeeze last, and actually you call it cat and mouse. Cat and mouse your opponent a little bit as you're kind of like working the position, finessing it, and seeing what kind of additional weaknesses you can create, and maybe they'll fall apart psychologically in addition to positionally and tactically. So after rook c8, king c1, rook c7, so we're just waiting, seeing if they have anything, and they do have something. And now I think it's like 1.5 or +2 in evaluation. Yeah, it's just increasing, increasing, increasing. This has got to be winning, yeah. So after you take, if you don't take, well, you can't. Yeah, you can't deal with it. Otherwise, the rook will just take with the pawn. I would probably just take with the rook, and then I have a new weakness here. Well, you're going to win g6 next, so everything falls. So you got to take it. Now he just, yeah, I think that's prudent to take back. No need to be hasty and let him take here. Just take the pawn and let it just sit on it. The threat is greater than the execution, as Nimzovich said. And this is falling. You have to go king f7 then. There's a rook f6 check as well. Yeah, I think you could have done that, but or he could have done that. King d2, a6, again waiting, trying to hope that there's no invasion, but the king is coming. See that now? That's, I mean, every single piece is superior now. So you've got the squeeze, you've got the invading rook, and you've got the invading king. That's decisive. Now I'm going to guess +2, almost +2, 1.6. So you give up the pawn because there's nothing else to do, I guess. But now the king, yeah, king just wins it, takes that one, and then white just ends up, yeah, white just ends up cleaning up pawns here. Was there anything else to do? Did you have to push? I'm not, and this is a very complex position. I just don't know how you can hold it. I mean, what is the invasion? I think the threat is f4, and then possibly even f5. So let's say he takes, king takes. That king is invading. That king is going to walk right in. Let's look at a sample line. Let's look at a sample line. So if f4, for example, or like if you wait again. No, you can't even, it's like sort of a Zugzwang because, ooh, is it a Zugzwang? Ouch, yeah, that's tough because you can't go here because now you have this, that falls. So you don't even need f4, you don't need to trade it. Just let it, don't trade it. Just let this be a sitting duck on e5 and pick it off. What else is there? You got to guard this, you got to guard this, you got to guard this. That's a nice Zugzwang there, it looks like. Now the other move would be here, but now we can pick off the a pawn easily if you want. Check. Ooh. Over actually not the a pawn, now we get the g pawn, which is even better. And then you can get the h pawn. And this guy can push, and you ought to still watch out, babysit these guys. Yeah, so it's the invasion combined with those weaknesses. And again, it comes down to b5 there. That led to the weaknesses and white's probing of the position with g5 himself. So lots of weaknesses. Pawn structure, chess, that's it. That's the soul of chess. That's everything. So I think the rest is sort of a route. Yeah, it's just check, takes. Yeah, he just cleans up now, picks up more pawns, push, threatening to get a queen. That was a good move. So he's willing to trade. They usually say if you're winning by pawns, you don't want to trade too many pawns because you don't want to get a drawish position where there's one pawn left and they can get a theoretical draw with the rook endgame sometimes. But given that white is just picking up so many pawns, you know, it looked funny to go to g1, but I think you kind of have to because you don't want this to happen. You want to win the pawn. So by going to g1, you're just winning the pawn, and you can challenge the rook with rook h2 anytime you want to challenge the second rank, and bring your rook up next. I mean, sorry, I'm messing up. Your king up. So here, checks. So okay, interesting. So the king has to come back, and then you take and take the next. So again, he's willing to give this up, and he just clarifies the situation. I don't know if he had to take right away. I think he probably could have played king here, because if this falls, you go here just the same. And that's 3 against 1. That's going to fall probably. But I think this is just clarity. He achieved clarity. If you have clarity, you may as well take it. Oh, no, not even. Even if you have 2. I remember I beat an IM once in this exact same structure in the World Open. That was a fun game that ended up just like this. But after rook f5 check, you're not even. There's no more contest because now you've got connected past pawns and your king could just come in and supports the pawns. So wow, that was really interesting. Again, break that symmetry. I'd be interested to hear Matt's thoughts regarding your symmetry, for example, with e5 in addition to b5. Those were 2 sort of fateful decisions I think that were made with regard to the pawn structure. And yeah, that was a good move though. The key move was knight b7, and that really just fixed your pawns there, and that ended up favoring white in addition to this, controlling that. So then white had all these advantages And then you didn't even end up trading off the rook, so he got to keep the d file as well. And those advantages just add up. Let's see, are there any, let's see, we have this going. Oh, thank you, Kostas. We have Kostas is, we played some chess 960 games, so maybe we'll get into some more chess 960 when I have some time. But yeah, hopefully that was helpful for the analysis, and feel free to provide a response, Matt, in the comments or on Twitter or your own video if you have a defense. Because I didn't mean to be too harsh, but I'm trying to be helpful. Constructive criticism. But yeah, especially your other game too. You played really, it was like this really complex French, which I'll just, yeah, I'll flip through real quick. Why not? This got crazy. It was a bit hard to evaluate this one. And then you were also playing with black here. Now the one thing I wasn't so sure about was when you played c4, it just didn't seem thematic. Okay, but this was interesting though. I mean, that was a very interesting idea, creating this weakness on c3, and it transposes to some type of, I think it's Winover French, but you didn't have to give up your bishop here, but with the same pawn structure. Instead, you gave up a pawn rather than giving up the bishop pair, and you don't have those weaknesses. That was interesting. And then things just got super tactical. But yeah, I was a little skeptical of c4 at first, again, from a pawn structure perspective. I mean, sometimes you'll see d4 played, and you open up that bad bishop on b7 that might get blocked. That was definitely playable. And unfortunately, we don't have f6 ideas so easily because you'll weaken e6. Usually that's done when the bishop is here guarding e6. So this was kind of cool how it worked out. Let's just look at his win, because again, not to be too harsh, I want to show a nice game that Matt played here. So this is interesting. He sacks a piece. Now he didn't follow up by taking on c8 though. He attacks this, goes here. Oh, is he thinking he's gonna trap the queen? I think that's what it boiled down to. He thought he had the queen, and I guess he didn't. No, you couldn't have the queen either way. Must have been some maybe white got a little over ambitious there, or maybe saw a ghost or something. Yeah, you now ended up just being up a piece. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened there with the whole sacking on d5. He may as well, I think at some point he could have had like e6 or something and try to break through. But he didn't do that. Yeah, so this was the second game that Matt submitted. But basically, I just chose one. And I generally like to I'd rather probably look at a loss rather than a win, unless the win is super instructive. If there's like other things that throughout the game that we can look at. There's definitely a lot here. This was a mess though. So it just became tactical after rook here. You take, he gets the d pawn. But yeah, you're up a piece. So, and now you got that diagonal. This has got to be just completely winning for black. White is trying to complicate matters. Now he's down to rook and he resigned. That was interesting. So that was a cool game. And both games were good. Let me know what you think about the first one in particular with all the analysis that I did on that one. And yeah, look forward to seeing what you think. Have a good day.